Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and we're finally getting around to it. This is part 2 of the Black Pants Legion's lore video on the Armistice Civil War and the collapse of the Star Legion. Now, again, it's been a little while since I watched part 1, but I did rewatch it just to make sure. But the reason I've been so hesitant to finally actually watch this video is, purely of the length. The video is over 2 hours long, so, yeah, obviously this is going to be a multi-part reaction. Yeah, so anyway, at the very least, this is going to be cut up. I mean, I don't really know how I'm going to cut this up as the thing, because I don't like my videos being over an hour long, but, so I very well might try cutting this up into 3 pieces. I have no idea. Anyways, now it's finally time to go up against Fat Genghis Khan and see where this whole mess, actually ends. So yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will link to my Let's Play of the day, as well as, the other parts of this video will also be linked, in those places. But yes, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing actually started then, shall we? What?
Okay, class. Sit down and shut up. We're going to get through this lesson before we evacuate. You did pay me, after all, and this professor needs those student vouchers for booze money. Also, regrettably, it looks like the clanners figured out where I live, and those jokes didn't go over so well. Smoked Jaguar, indeed.
How dare you mock my noble lineage? This is a notice of battle.
Excuse me, fucko. Firstly, interrupting a class is rude. Secondly, this lecture is about Star League, so it's like Baskin-Robbins' 51 flavors of dishonorable. Don't you want these guys to know their history of the noble Star League? Of the glories of General Kerensky himself?
I am sorry. Can I sit in? I will still review later.
Yeah, sure, I guess.
At least he has his priorities.
Don't go through the wall and take a seat in the back.
Ah, noble founder. This is a good lecture.
Preamble and recap, yep.
One of this series, we introduced the brave, the bold, the crazy, and the just plain unfortunate souls who took part in this series of events. In the beginning, we explored the formation of Star League, a grand, unifying government built around a centralized, efficient bureaucracy encompassing the great 5 houses of the Inner Sphere. We highlighted key events contributing to its growth, rise, peak, and then gradual collapse from increasingly difficult political turmoil.
Yeah.
In part 1, we studied the formation of the SLDF, the single largest military instrument ever created, and its utilization to brutally bring the Periphery in line at gunpoint, because the Inner Sphere likes a free real estate deal above everything else. We also learned that Stefan Amaris, through his scheming, and scheming alone, managed to destabilize an increasingly shaky government by removing the head of state. Quite literally in this case.
Yeah.
To accomplish this, he gambled everything he had. He'd started a war. He put people into the right place at the right time to take control. Together, we discovered that he was a man driven to avenge personal slights against his family, his nation, and his honor by House Cameron, and by extension, Star League. He'd acted out of lust for power, vengeance, and above all, personal vendetta. He alone, through his actions, toppled the old regime through a masterfully orchestrated coup, his forces being in perfect position to seize the hegemony in a single act of magnificent barbarism and cruelty. And it is of note that he nearly failed because of the bagpipe, whiskey, and madness-fueled royal unit that was the glorious Black Watch.
Oh God, the Black Watch.
The mad stand of the Black Watch is a tale still told with reverence between mech warriors for generations now. And it's very important to understand that in dying the way they did, they sent a message. This wasn't going to be as easy as
they thought
Amaris
it
had
would.
thought. In a magnificent moment of glorious defiance, in a blaze of crazy, mad bastardism, Amaris was reminded of how fragile a thing like victory truly is. And this brush with near death would never leave him. Amaris would, in fact, take increasingly paranoid steps to ensure his reign was secure. He was, in my opinion, haunted by what might have been, and what may yet be.
As he
The
should.
Black Watch and their death were just a moment in history, but for Amaris they were a fearful, constant reminder of how easy it could have gone the other way. But we will get to that soon enough. In the last episode, we also had our introductory study in the profile and career of General Kerensky. We saw how he tried to do his best to keep things as they were, in a delicate political balance and in certainly uncertain times. Kerensky was a powerful general, to be certain, but he was tasked with raising a First Lord and in a very uncertain political arena. Star League was in decline, and this heir presumptively could have reversed the course of history. He did his best as an advisor and protector, but ultimately he fell back on what he knew best, his duty and oaths to Star League above all, and that would ultimately doom his efforts. But we'll get to that.
You know, that is... I mean, that is kind of, a little funny. I mean, granted, like, a lot of this is based on, history with, ruling families and stuff like that. But, I mean, very often, you'd think that, having somebody who's, a military... Generally, people who are, very brilliant, in military manners aren't brilliant when it comes to the matters of anything else. Those are two personality types that generally don't cross over.
And lastly, in part 1, we set the ground for the throwdown of throwdowns, the Guerra on Terra, a war so big it would shake the foundation of the inner sphere and lead
Sold
to
out.
centuries of violence, political turmoil, adventurism, and chaos. As you may recall, we left this lesson on a wonderful cliffhanger. Amaris had contacted Kerensky and offered everything. A place in the new regime, ultimate power as a general, if not warlord, and very potentially a very real place as inheritor of Star League itself. But, tempted with everything, the keys to power and the right to use it as he saw fit, Kerensky remembered above all his duty to his oaths, Star League above all. Kerensky had said no. And it wouldn't be the last time. So here we are, at the Amaris Civil War. Warning. If you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend it.
Oh, believe me, I saw it.
Anyways, introduction over, recap over. Here we go. If the theme to part 1 was the death of Richard Cameron and the after effects of the initial coup, the theme to part 2 is the death of Star League. Buckle up, lads. It's going to be a long one.
You believe me, I know that.
The Amaris Civil War would rage from 2766 to 2780 in a 14-year campaign that would decide the ultimate fate of Star League.
Wait, sorry, how long a year campaign?
14-year campaign
14, okay,
that would
geez.
decide the ultimate fate of Star League. It would cost in the end humanity generations of
14 years.
lives in indiscriminate slaughter. Each and every weapon ever crafted by humanity would be used in the greatest contest of wills, arms, and armies ever seen. This war was the end result of, and made worse by, a seemingly endless arms race that until now lacked an outlet for its destructive energies. This was a war unlike any other in the history of man up to this point, so comparisons are hard to make directly. For the first time, humanity was at war with itself across the entire span of the inner sphere. From the Rimworld's republic to the Terran hegemony, this world would touch hundreds of worlds, leaving many blasted, irradiated, and broken wastelands in its wake. This was a war that seldom offered any quarter, and civilian populations died in terror as increasingly destructive weapons were utilized by desperate combatants. This was a war where slaughter was the norm, and strategic weapons were just another tool. At least in the eyes of Amaris. The Amaris Civil War started with surgical precision as a calculated coup, and when Amaris turned from coup phase to an actual war footing, both his Rimworld's Republic and the SLDF stood atop tremendous, though wholly different, resources to commit to their campaign. The grand prize in all of this was control of the Terran hegemony, the potential rule of Star League itself, and by extension the future of the inner sphere. For the sake of historical note, I will have to try to explain something here. While Kerensky was busy in the Periphery, Amaris had struck and struck well. The head of House Cameron was vaporized, the inheritors of that name dead or gone, and it is keen to note that consolidating an empire isn't merely a change of flags.
No, it's
Further, when he came under attack by mad bastards who loved kilts, bagpipes, and murder, though not necessarily in that order, he had been reminded on the pain of hubris. Again, for the record, I say this event scarred Amaris. For Amaris was reminded that he was mortal, and that it took the use of tactical nukes and many of his best men to stop people so angry they refused to die.
Oh, geez, that whole sentence. I mean, oh god, you know what I'm just imagining? You have like some sort of, sci-fi novel, or even like if you had like somebody write a novel taking place in like the Mech Warrior BattleTech universe, I should say. And you have that be the first line of the novel. That is a hook.
It is again my opinion of record that the Black Watch haunted Amaris in ways he'd never considered possible. It's not surprising that he'd be unable to forget the Black Watch. After all, their resistance was quickly becoming a legend. And when a unit's favorite grenade is satchel charges, it seems to leave an impression at the very least. But
in multiple ways,
in the
yes.
aftermath of nearly dying to the batshit madness of the Black Watch, that brush with the possibility of a gruesome end and failure had, again, in my opinion, a profound effect on Amaris. My evidence is the historical note that he became increasingly paranoid after this event. And began to clamp down on the population to ensure, at any cost, he would be safe. Coup secured, Amaris did not just sit idle.
Also banned.
Again, as building an empire isn't something you can handle with a pen. No, empires are forged by the sword. To the point,
Golden Corral.
in the first week of January, Amaris imported tens of thousands of hand-picked, utterly loyal men from the Rimworld's Republic that would serve as the foundation for the hegemony security forces. Their aim? To make problems go away. By go away, I mean root out dissidents, naysayers, or anyone with any strong objection to Amaris' rule and make them disappear by any means possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
These agents forming the hegemony security forces would, through their calculated, state-sponsored cruelty, give Amaris the power he'd aspired for. Their excesses in cruel methodology would haunt the worlds they touched for generations. Publicly, Amaris insisted on at least pretending things were normal. Normal for Amaris's taste, anyhow. To gain the barest sliver of legitimacy as a ruling power, he called for immediate votes for a new Director General of the hegemony, and further the appearance of legitimacy by directly appointing a hegemony noble to serve in the interim until a vote could be had. The vote for the new hegemony Director General was organized swiftly through the widespread placement of the new hegemony security forces.
Yeah, it wasn't really an election, was it?
Integration of RimWorld's Republic units throughout the occupied territory prior to the coup. The vote was held despite widespread destruction, panic, and near-total communications breakdown during the coup, and limited repair afterwards. Further, there was the consideration that hegemony analysts projected at best a 10% turnout for the vote, considering the widespread issues with organizing a vote in a chaotic post-coup state. But that wouldn't do for Amaris. He had a new empire to run, after all. Amaris claimed an 85% turnout, with 70% overwhelmingly voting for Amaris. This was a fairly amazing feat, considering many of these worlds were cut off from the HPG network, and over half the planetary governors were dead or missing.
Yeah, totally legit. This was a real and totally not screwed with election in the slightest.
Regardless of the legality, Amaris had his title. Those who did report favorable voting turnout did so under extreme duress. But that hardly mattered, as Amaris was, at least provisionally, now the legal Director General of the Terran hegemony. This was abhorrent and horrific to the ruling classes, but it would set the acceptable precedent for generations afterward in practical regime change throughout the Inner Sphere. Once installed as the new Director General of the Terran hegemony, he promised a grand new era of peace and prosperity, that House Cameron's foolishness and mistakes were now at an end, and that the future would be one of unity under his guiding hand. This was not to be just a new hegemony, but a new Star League, reborn as an empire under the guiding vision and limitless power of a new emperor, bold enough to seize it. The HPG networks not critically damaged were slowly reactivated, with the first circuit of SL Comnet firing up to deliver the announcement of Amaris's new empire. Kerensky was the first to issue a reality check. Kerensky's response was legend. No. The major houses
just
offered
no.
something more.
He literally just said no? Yeah, I guess. I mean, that's on the same level of just saying nuts.
Blunt, though. Silence. The great houses did not lend him legitimacy, but they also did not mourn the fall of House Cameron. In a way, their silence answered many questions. First, it demonstrated their feelings about House Cameron. Richard Cameron suddenly disappearing after making some exceptionally poor decisions was seen as a favor, if not boon, to the great houses. There was to be no more meddlesome madness from a fading line of bad rulers. No more directives, laws, or missives from a child playing God. But their silence also spoke volumes of the current assessment of the power balance. They were afraid, after all, and had every right to be. Amaris had done the impossible. He had orchestrated the defeat of the hegemony by stabbing it in the heart. He'd taken the head off the beast, so to speak. He'd overcome defenses designed to be impregnable, and he'd even given the SLDF a black eye. He had done the impossible, and done so in such a way as they wondered what else might he have up his sleeve. They considered, was Amaris waiting to topple them as well, and challenging them to make the first move? In addition, you have to consider that individually the House militaries were somewhat limited by the preceding decades of Star League buildup.
Yeah, I remember that.
They'd been given every excuse to put trust in the SLDF, and had done so as arms buildups were exceptionally if not prohibitively expensive. Also, SLDF Charter had regulated the size of their militaries, and as such, they knew if they defied and then openly challenged Amaris, they might find themselves overthrown in the name of whatever the hell Amaris was smoking. But on the other hand, they also knew that if Kerensky returned and managed to restore the status quo, any assistance or compliance given to Amaris would become, perhaps, problematic. As such, the House Lords said nothing, and chose no sides, at least officially. However, it is interesting to note that the great houses immediately asked General Kerensky's intentions, and for him to report his movements. The House Lords' response is reasonable. They had their own issues on their own home soil. You see, the Starleague bureaucracy wasn't doing so well, and that somewhat made things difficult from an organizational standpoint. SLDF bureaucrats didn't know what to do. Follow instructions issued from the hegemony from a usurper. Follow instructions issued from a general far, far away. Follow instructions of the great house institutions they supported and paralleled. This wasn't just the case of paperwork and who stamps what. This was a financial network and banking system that held the wealth of billions upon billions of taxpayers.
Okay, yeah, that too.
This was the civil infrastructure and logistics system of the greatest nation ever formed. Bureaucrats across the inner sphere struggled with what to do. They were, after all, in a crisis of leadership. With communications difficulties, lack of orders, or in some cases countermanding orders, plus the House Lords offering integration opportunities with their existing systems, many bureaucrats just went home, or found new jobs with their house governments, and when their checks started to bounce, they decided to walk away. Some civil servants desperately tried to maintain what services they could, believing in Starleague as it fell, believing it may return someday. Most, however, turned their assets and holdings over to the great houses in their jurisdictional territory, choosing to side with a stable government over one ruled by a potential psychopath. Throughout Starleague, the overnight conquest of the hegemony destabilized the Starleague dollar, causing widespread economic chaos. The outages of the HPG network further caused rampant speculation and market woes. Without regulatory control or banking afforded by the Starleague financial institutions now either being abandoned or co-opted by the great houses, people pulled their money out of once safe Starleague investments. Throughout the inner sphere, investors transferred enormous wealth from what was once saved Starleague monetary investments and bonds into house bills as soon as they were able.
You know, I really gotta wonder just how this is going to end. Because, I mean, obviously, I know at this point in, like, whatever you'd call the modern day that in BattleTech, like, Starleague is dead. It's been gone for a long time. But, I mean, but also the galaxy isn't ruled by some sort of Amaris government. So, did the general win? But by that point, everything had been pulled out of Starleague so much that it was basically a moot point and it ceased to exist anyway. Did Amaris win? But the damage from the Civil War was so great that, like, he had to deal with, like, the internal strife from his conquered territory basically caused everything to fall apart on his end. Was it just some massive stalemate that where the two sides just obliterated themselves throughout the war and then there was just the great houses left? What? How is this going to end?
Folks saw the writing on the wall and voted with their wallet. To the common citizen, Starleague as an investment, either financially or the future, was doomed. And as General Kerensky carefully deliberated his actions, as he knew full well that rash action in this time would doom the cause of Starleague, Amaris continued to reshape the hegemony into his new empire. For to occupy a nation, as stated before, is one thing, but to reshape it, that takes time. As stated earlier, Amaris had founded the hegemony security forces, and those began rapidly forming huge contingents on every occupied hegemony world, recruiting most heavily from those least loyal to Star League, least loyal to the Camerons, and most swayed by money or the promise of power.
Of course,
Amaris
as you do.
also formed the Director General's Office of Policy and Doctrine. This was, more or less, an exported extension of Amaris's practice in his homeland, a political officer's corps to police wrongthink. And boys and girls, Amaris
Wrongthink,
hated
yay.
wrongthink. Amaris
Wonderful.
punished wrongthink. And wrongthink was defined as anything Amaris didn't like. To eliminate any anti-Amaris sentiment, OPD officers were placed in every government office and building across the hegemony to ensure total compliance with every new governmental policy and memorandum. OPD officers bugged public and private places, eavesdropped on all conversation, monitored all communications traffic, and watched with practiced eyes all actions taken by any citizen of this new empire. And under their gaze, suspicion alone was enough to warrant severe reprisals. The Terran hegemony was now in essence little more than a garrisoned, heavily occupied police state. Internal security policing actions resulted in the formation of enormous gulags, over which 200,000 were sent the first year alone. Few, if any, ever returned.
Of course, they're
Amaris's
gulag.
goons promised great monetary rewards for reporting traitors, disloyal citizens, outspoken critics, or even the barest suggestion of subversive activity. Soon, friends and family turned on each other out of desperation or fear. The state was all, and Comrade Amaris was the state.
I swear, at this point, it's like, he's not even trying to pretend that he's the good guy here, at the very least.
By April that year, Amaris had formally begun the recruiting and training of some 30 divisions to replace and reinforce his holdings on the hegemony. They were raised from hegemony worlds, but trained, led, and equipped by RimWorld's Republic forces. Every defensible position on any garrisoned world was turned into a massively reinforced fortress. The streets of the hegemony were now policed by men rewarded for brutality and wiping out even the barest notion of dissent with overwhelming violence. Reports of death squads roaming the street became commonplace.
Oh,
Outspoken
wonderful.
individuals, former SLDF officers, their families and friends all disappeared or fled. Those who criticized the regime or its actions were swiftly erased from history. Amaris's regime had no place for fence-sitters. You were either pro-Amaris, or you were fucking dead. Mercenaries loyal to Amaris were used to conduct the least tasteful work, or at least the work that required a certain essence of plausible deniability.
Oh.
For unsavory purposes, Amaris...
Wait, seriously, he's going through all of this, like turning like this into a captured, like, and he needs plausible deniability for. I swear, the mind of a dictator, it never makes sense.
Amaris had retained the infamous mercenary unit, the Greenhaven Gestapo. They were at first
Gestapo? That's what they were actually called.
Highly morally flexible advisors to Stefan Amaris, but he found their contributions in taking the hegemony worth rewarding. Ruthless and efficient, the mercs were exactly what Amaris prized. Later on, their war crimes would be a permanent scar on his regime. As stated...
Surprise, surprise! Who would have thought?
The Greenhaven Gestapo was instrumental in the seizing of main Terran government buildings, in displays of savagery and brutality much in line with Amaris's designs. However, once they were turned on the civilian population, things quickly degenerated into looting, pillaging, and murder in the name of state security. As they were mercenaries at heart, the Greenhaven Gestapo decided to make some quick coin and sacked Rome. Why? Well, it was the mercenary tradition long standing at that time through centuries back to sack Rome, as Rome was historically always a good choice for quick cash and good ransom. Being largely undefended with little in the way of organized resistance, Rome quickly bent to their occupation. And as history will indicate, they ran amok in the Papal States. For example, one of their commanders had a portrait of himself spray-painted over the Sistine Chapel. When 750 Catholic monks had a hunger strike in the square, a member of the Greenhaven Gestapo blocked them in with his rampage and stomped them flat. And then they went further with their fun. They then arrested the Pope after he refused to point out priests who were disloyal to the regime. 3 years later, they'd murder the Pope after he refused to cooperate.
You know, I literally just... I thought he was talking about the far past, but no, this is in the Civil War by the Green Gestapo. Really? Okay. I mean, I know, like, the whole thing with, like, dictators and, like, Amaris, and, you know, the whole thing is, like, you know, they'll do anything to stay in power. But at this point, it's like, it seems like at this point, you're just throwing gasoline on the ground and waiting for somebody to light a match.
Through his mercs, Amaris didn't just target Catholics either. Amaris was, after all, a true atheist and decided the universe was a neater place without the complexities of an organized religion. His death squads oppressed all regardless of their faith, for he had room for only one form of worship, to the person and glory of Stephen Amaris. All others were impediments to his operations.
Oh my god, did they actually have the Waffen-SS logo as their thing? Oh god.
Such impediments were removed with ruthless precision. Soon enough, the everyday citizen of his new empire would find themselves under his whip. Amaris made hugely unrealistic demands from the population at large, but all the more from its workers and factories. Workers were brutally beaten, tortured, and executed for failing to meet insane projected production schedules. Meeting quotas was rewarded with additional quotas. People worked their fingers to the bone to earn the reward of bony fingers. Food and medicine were in short supply, a supply regulated by priority toward people Amaris saw as doing what he wanted. The economy switched to a war footing as Amaris entrenched every world he could, building strategic weapons stockpiles for what he saw as the inevitable showdown. Factories were increasingly turned over to weapons production, ammunitions production. Fuel and tires and uniforms were churned out in massive stockpiles and put away for the coming storm. Consumer goods disappeared from stores nearly entirely, as supplies other than war material began to run low. While worlds were given increasingly ridiculous production quotas and exhaustive production schedules, this was complicated by Amaris continuing to raise armies and garrisons, further depleting the worlds of their effective labor forces. And some complained, stating they couldn't both raise armies and equip them. However, complaints were not acceptable under Amaris's regime. If a world complained or even reported food shortages, food was withheld and the entire world was punished. Troubles mounting, Amaris soon began to see problems everywhere. People refusing to believe in him were punished. Worlds he suspected of treason he punished. Populations that pushed back were punished.
I mean, what did I literally just say about throwing gasoline? I mean, he made these own problems, and I swear, if this was like this is the kind of thing that if it was this was like in some sort of like country management game or something like this would be one of those scenarios where it's like, oh, the old dictator was just like overthrown. You're now the guy in charge. Fix it.
The civilian situation increasingly worsened throughout the hegemony as Amaris squeezed the people for all they had. Food and medical supplies were soon in critical shortage, and he withheld them routinely as yet another measure of punishment. People begging to be fed was just another punishable crime in Amaris's new empire. And after seeing the excesses of Amaris's consolidation of power, of the SLDF being deleted from the hegemony with nuclear, biological, and chemical attacks, of the bureaucrats being shot at their desks for refusing to move a stamp, most citizens realized they had to deal with the realities of the present rather than hope for a brighter tomorrow. After all, they'd seen those who resisted in the initial stages of the takeover being turned into radioactive sinkholes. Hope was, essentially, dead. Slowly but surely, the hegemony descended into a siege mentality, building stockpiles and defenses for the coming long war. Through excesses in human suffering, Amaris made significant headway. He reinforced the hegemony in ways the Star League never considered. He knew the shortcomings of Star League's extensively planned defenses, for he'd found weaknesses in and exploited them
exactly.
Through hard work and exceptional human suffering, he turned peaceful yet defensible worlds into hellish death traps. He reinforced every fortification for any conceivable attack, siege, or protracted battle. He ordered his men to drill exhaustively and to constantly train to avoid embarrassment like the 4th Amaris Dragoons fighting mad bastards wearing kilts. He ordered the construction of bunkers.
I swear, those guys did so much damage to him. I know there's the whole saying of, living rent-free inside somebody's head, but at this point, they're not living rent-free. They literally own his head. Like, the whole thing, like, he has gone, like, so insane that this whole thing, like now I'm very much starting to see why there's, like, no trace of Amaris left in the, in the modern setting. Because it seems like, even if he did, squash all hope and something like that, all the stuff that he built, like, this is, like, very, like, at least from the look of it, like, exceedingly top-heavy. As soon as you cut off the head, it looks like the entire thing's just gonna unravel. Because it's like under like such like tension and pressure. As soon as you get rid of that, poof, gone.
Hardened defensive points and extensive space-borne defenses as well. Please try to understand that Amaris, while having extensively prepared, knew the full might of the SLDF Navy, which was enormous and quite inclined to fuck things up if given the opportunity.
Yeah,
you'd
think.
The War in the Stars went well for Amaris because his men got lucky, and after several bloody fights seized the space defense network. But he knew the bulk of the Navy would return with Kerensky, and so men were trained extensively on the operation of established space defense systems. These space defense systems would figure heavily into Amaris's plans, as his navy suffered heavily in pushing the SLDF out of the hegemony in the initial stages of the coup. The Star League Navy had accounted for itself well, and there were holdouts still hiding in the hegemony, doing much to harass and spy on Amaris's doings from secret locations. I may, if you all are interested, do a whole talk on the grand old Star League Navy, but I'll spare the details for now, as that would be yet another hour. Let me know.
Again, getting the whole thing of like working my way through this, like through the playlist, I am absolutely terrified because like it looks like I'm pretty sure like 95% of the videos in that playlist are at least an hour long. So that's just kind of what you get for going into one of these settings. Like, it's just so rammed full of lore. And usually, I'm not the one to complain about lore, but like when you get all of it at once.
Might be fun anyways. Worlds under Amaris's thumb were patrolled for the first sight of the SLDF. Drone ships constantly hunted the hegemony for even the smallest observation craft, making intelligence gathering for the SLDF a precarious venture, if not a lethal operation. As now established, each house, now concerned with many possible futures and not wanting to back a loser, decided to mostly stay out of it. As such, the war broke down to the principal antagonists. Side A was the forces of Stefan Amaris, leading the occupied Terran hegemony systems, including their now extensively reinforced defenses growing stronger by the day. Further, he was aided by powerful defense industries and the hegemony long established as the primary arms producers of the Inner Sphere. He held these in addition to the Ascendant Rimworld's Republic, which he had secretly prepared its industry, economy, and military specifically for this conflict.
Yeah.
I won't be vague here. Let's put this into numbers. Amaris's own forces included at least 100 regiments of battle mechs alone. To keep in mind, a single regiment of battle mechs is 150 to 180 fucking mechs plus support divisions.
Oh, okay.
Amaris also had the entire naval and aerospace assets of a great house many times over. Through his house's careful preparation for the coup, minus the early lumps handed to him by the SLDF Navy, he maintained a strong grip on the Rimworld's Republic, in addition to all the hidden SLDF weapon stockpiles in the occupied hegemony. Historical notes show us that for decades, the SLDF had warned that the Rimworld's Republic was building an army many times over what they were allowed by Star League Treaty. Warnings that were now far too late.
Yeah, of course.
For the record here, there is some dispute over the total naval assets of Amaris, but it is said that he possessed over 270 warships prior to the coup, many of which were as good, if not better, than the SLDF fleet. House armies had 50 to 70 warships at most. Many of those were not line ships. Most house navies had a small core flotilla of capital vessels, and then the remainder was split between patrol and support vessels for anti-piracy duties. And as established, the Rimworld's Republic had patiently built a war machine for generations just for this single moment. Every industry and government plan had been laid down on the principal need to feed a war-fighting capacity to challenge the SLDF openly if need be. Hell, Amaris had even built enormous battleships, which were better protected than SLDF's biggest warships. They called them the Amaris class, by the way.
Oh, geez, really?
Amaris is, well, don't make me get the bib picture
Yeah, he's subtle like that.
out again. The guy had issues. Issues that were only solved by, well, enormous battleships named after himself, because that's the kind of guy he was, and... Okay, we'll do this again.
Oh, God.
Look, he's wearing a bib. This guy has some problems, and who the fuck is holding his arm? Is that like the general manager for the Golden Corral of Space Kansas? It's not inspiring. If you take someone's head off and brilliantly overcome the greatest defenses yet designed, wear something nice like his smoking jacket. Editor, can we do that? And a top hat. Class him up a bit. I know people are gonna go nuts over someone so Machiavellian looking, just like a goof, but just class him up a bit, like 2 notches. Good. Better. Anyway.
I'm sorry, I generally was not anticipating that.
While Amaris had lost significant numbers of his navy to the initial space battles in the hegemony, he was now building new hulls on Star League yards and blueprints. Further, he
John
was
Moses
rapidly
Browning.
training his
Oh,
men
okay.
thoroughly on the operation of the now captured SDS networks. Soon all that power would be firmly in his hands. Needless to say, Amaris was sitting on an enormous stockpile of world's weapons and personnel to throw into the fray. He was growing stronger by the day. He awaited Kerensky's next action, trying to bait him into attacking the hegemony directly after being bogged down. So
where is
let's look at
Kerensky in
the
all
opposite
this?
side of this equation. Side B of this conflict was the SLDF, a huge multinational force which had now been bogged down in years of counterinsurgency fighting in the Periphery. Worn down by years of hard campaigning spread across the entire Periphery, bloodied and bitter at putting down a needless insurrection, and now devastated at the loss of their friends and comrades in the hegemony, the SLDF was certainly on the back foot from the beginning, not to mention now being completely cut off from any reinforcement or supply. Losses in the Periphery uprising and rebellion, plus hegemony losses in the coup, put total SLDF manpower by 1,255 regiments. I'll say that again as a chill runs down your veteran friend's spine. 1,255 regiments. Gone. 30% of the SLDF's effective military strength from pre-war levels was now totally gone. History has shown us that armies rarely bounce back from losses such as these, if at all. The survivors were now hollow men and women haunted by a horrific, senseless war in the Periphery, and now many of them were without a home, or a government, or a cause. The hegemony was occupied, and the status of the First Lord at this point was an unknown. Some would point out that the SLDF had the numerical advantage here, including far superior numbers and naval assets.
Yeah, but I mean, morale is a very important thing, not just numbers. A small motivated force can do a heck of a lot more than a large force that doesn't want to fight.
It is worth noting that the SLDF was split into regional commands. In addition, Kerensky was unable to draw upon the additional resources from the great houses he expected, or even in the occupied hegemony. An army this large would soon need massive resupply before any campaign of conquest, and they had no infrastructure other than what they could seize and capture.
Yeah, that's kind of important.
There was no infrastructure to replace their extensive losses, no recruitment centers, no resupply and logistics train available. The great houses were not going to help them. They were on their own. Having an army all the larger than your opponent does no good when supplies run low or out. The SLDF was cut off and in a desperate state the day House Cameron fell. They had lost over 30% of their strength mauled into combat ineffectiveness in the Periphery War. They had lost 1 million men before the coup had even started. Further, with the collapse of the Star League bureaucracy came the near total loss of operational budgets and supply. The SLDF at the start of 2767 had at best 10% of its former budget trickling in from tax collectors and administrators still loyal or alive. There would be no paychecks from here forward, and procurement divisions had no means to buy anything at any price. Things were grim. The SLDF teetered on the brink. Kerensky's forces had fought a needless war. They had learned that their home was gone and their leader replaced by a madman. They had no money, no country, and seemingly no future. Supplies were exhausted, ships needed refit and overhaul, and spares disappeared. Morale was accordingly near zero. They needed a fucking miracle. What the Star League Defense Force had, though, was General Alexander Sergeyevich Kerensky. And angry Russians tend to make it into the history books.
Oh, God, yeah.
Kerensky had purpose and determination. Instead of weighing his options endlessly or sending his troops home, instead of obeying his government, instead of giving up and running away or trying to bargain and buy favor, Kerensky had told the usurper no. Just flatly, no. Amaris had mocked him in reply. Amaris had mocked him and challenged Kerensky to try to attack him. And it would have been suicidal, as the extensive space defense systems in the hegemony were designed to stop massed fleets and invasion forces. And as said, Amaris had paid the price in conquering them, and yet every moment that Amaris had in the hegemony he would be digging in and preparing to defend what he had claimed.
Yeah.
It was an unenviable scenario to contemplate. Kerensky at this point had two choices: to drive into the hegemony immediately, to attack the Rimworld's Republic forces now deeply entrenched and in possession of the space defense systems and all the massive weapons stockpiles the hegemony had. Or Kerensky could go kick the shit out of Amaris' homeland, the Rimworld's Republic.
That's how you do it. Okay. Because I was almost thinking of that for a second there. Because Amaris, for everything, he was fortifying the lands that he conquered. While they said that they have built up the original republic, it had been built up over like generations. None of the new resources were going there to protect it. So I was almost thinking that had Amaris like unintentionally left himself with a big like soft spot in his back line. Oh, this is going to be good, isn't it? Oh God, we're only 40 minutes into the video. So much more is going to happen and it's going to suck, I know it!
Kerensky decided that if Amaris would occupy his home, then Kerensky could burn Amaris's down. Well, more or less. There were strategic considerations for this. Kerensky rarely acted out of emotion, so this wasn't just done out of pure spite or want to exact revenge. This wasn't ego-driven, but a more calculated response. Kerensky refused to fall for Amaris's trap and instead opted to hit Amaris's home to cut Amaris off from his beloved Rimworld's Republic, its resources, and any hope of significant reinforcement. As well, if the gamble proves successful, this would utterly trap Amaris's forces in the hegemony, buying Kerensky time to maneuver, politic, and perhaps involve the rest of the inner sphere. Additionally, the income of the Rimworld's Republic was exceptional, and by removing Amaris's purse strings even partially, he would make the inevitable throwdown in the hegemony far
that much easier, yeah.
Kerensky made his preparations. He told his men what they must do. He visited ships throughout the fleet and mustered his forces from jump points around the Periphery. He made certain to immediately change the ciphers and communications keys for his entire fleet, as by now he was certain SLDF communications were totally compromised through Amaris's capture and control of the hegemony. Orders were often hand-carried and eyes only. This would be an ambitious undertaking, and there was no room for error. Kerensky told his men and women that they would be launching on a grand campaign to restore Starleague and stop Amaris. He gave appropriate speeches for morale's sake, reinforcing the purpose of his mission. This wasn't about revenge. This was about Starleague. For as long as they lived, the dream was alive. They were soldiers and sailors and had work to do. Through this, he reminded the fleet of its duty. They had a mission. He also made moves to mitigate the supply shortfalls as best possible. His war plan hinged on the ability to forage what they needed from the Rimworld's Republic. To feed a conquest in essence through conquest, he ordered parts of his own forces, his own ships, his own mechs, his own tanks and stockpiles to be cannibalized for the war effort. He radically increased his operational equipment stockpile by eliminating the most damaged ships, mechs, and tanks and stripped those of parts to keep the rest going.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you have to do at the end of the day.
Raided. Kerensky ordered sold what he didn't immediately need to war profiteers in the growing black market to keep the SLDF going. He merged ruined regiments into new combined regimental combat teams. He consolidated his forces and told them that they would conquer the Rimworld's Republic and take it from Amaris before liberating the hegemony and restoring rightful order. Kerensky was not keen to make rapid strikes without proper intelligence. Cautiously, Kerensky assessed his situation, seeing what he was up against in the Rimworld's Republic.
Yeah.
Through his intelligence services, Kerensky suspected and then became aware of clandestine dealings in the inner sphere. Kurita had been a staunch supporter of Amaris and his dealings. Kerensky suspected that post-coup that arrangement was still in place. Meanwhile, House Merrick had extensively interfered with SLDF deployments during the Periphery War and now, afterwards, were apathetic to the cause of the SLDF, to say the least. The source of that contention was personal animosity. Kerensky once had a young Kenyan Merrick on his general's staff and checked his ambitions, and Merrick never forgot. These complications—
What is he, a child? I swear.
—meant that Kerensky could only possibly count on the other houses as, at best, potential allies. Even then, their responses were not enthusiastic. But he knew they would at least not be maneuvering against him, and the Periphery had an altogether more interesting response. The Periphery really didn't care the Cameron line had ended with a bang. even if the whereabouts and status of Richard Cameron were currently unknown to the galaxy at large. The populations of the Periphery did, however, care deeply when the SLDF showed up to fight a brutal war on their home turf.
Yeah.
The SLDF had emboldened the Periphery's long-standing anti-authoritarian, anti-inner streak by showing up to be exactly what they feared most, conquering assholes. But when Amaris took over, the Periphery soon saw their savior really didn't care a single fuck about them all that much. Amaris had issued orders for Kerensky to conquer the Periphery, to keep pressure on them, to crush them once and for all, and then to join Amaris's new empire. Upon realizing they were sold out, the Periphery was upset. For the Periphery had once at least somewhat trusted Amaris. After all, he was one of them. The Rimworld Republic was the greatest Periphery nation, after all. He was the nice fat guy who'd given them shitloads of money and weapons and pointed them at the SLDF, and now they realized they'd been played. The Periphery was now content to let Amaris deal with his own problems and let the SLDF leave uncontested.
Jeez, that just goes to show, if you're a jerk, then when the time comes, you're not going to have anybody on your side to fight with you. I mean, Amaris, for all this that he's doing wrong, like at this moment, all of this was put together masterfully. But the problem is, I suppose he showed his true face a little too quickly. I would hesitate to say, because now nobody likes anybody. Because now it seems like you have both sides of the Civil War have almost no support from anybody else.
They'd lost enough of their own and gained, perhaps, at least notionally, their independence. They were content to let things be. After this point, the Periphery would offer no substantial opposition for Kerensky's new goal, to wrecking ball the Rimworld Republic. In fact, many Periphery states met with the general and provided him full transcripts, intelligence, and information on Amaris's duplicity and dealings. This information would make Kerensky's conquests all the smoother. Kerensky jumped on the Rimworld Republic with a slightly rejuvenated SLDF, and in time his conquest became a campaign of legend. While Amaris had taken the bulk of his military to occupy the hegemony, the Rimworld's Republic was not a complete pushover as far as the Periphery states went.
I mean, yeah,
After all,
I'd imagine.
This was the place that Amaris had forged into a conquering nation-state. It was a nation built by a paranoid, psychotic asshole. House Amaris had primed this nation for war at every level through generations of careful work to further their strategic aims. It maintained a reasonable standing army by Periphery standards. It possessed a ruthlessly efficient internal security force, a tremendous strategic reserve, a well-educated population, and a massive defense industry. Taking the Rimworld's Republic was the smartest choice Kerensky could make. Taking it would cut Amaris off from extensively developed defense industry and ample recruiting grounds, not to mention a key source of income. On May 29th,
but it's not going to be easy, is it?
Kerensky issued the go order from his flagship McKenna's Pride. The fleet assembled at jump points, messages being hand-carried with new ciphers to ensure security. Across the Periphery, forces abandoned their conquest to rejoin the main fleet, often carrying with them the contents of SLDF bases they'd stripped for necessary supplies. Troops falling back set nasty reminders that Starlink property was not to be trifled with. Concordat troops found that out the hard way, when upon entering a Starlink base it collapsed on their head after a mountain of charges went off. Similarly, across the Periphery, Starlink bases were abandoned, trapped, and stripped of any and all resources Kerensky would need for his operation. This was an all-or-nothing gambit. Amaris had slowly bled the Rimworld Republic forces of their strength to set up his coup and occupation of the hegemony. It would still be a monumental endeavor. The Republic was enormous and well-provisioned, and while the Rimworld's Republic had dug in, they didn't have the numbers the SLDF massed fleet had. Every delay in attack would buy time for Amaris to fortify the Rimworld's Republic and hegemony both. Any other commander would have opted for speed alone in a campaign of nuclear hellfire and motherfucking revenge. Any other commander would have let his men and women loose in the name of vengeance, to let slip the dogs of war and count the dead afterwards. But
hard line.
Kerensky was not a monster. He refused to authorize a total war approach, and saved weapons of mass destruction for hardened military targets. But it would still be a war. There would be casualties. Kerensky took a careful approach, trying at his hardest to not indiscriminately slaughter his enemies for the sake of a decisive, rapid campaign. He didn't see the Rimworld's Republic as an enemy, merely, in this case, an adversary. He saw his job as to restore the peace from an unlawful usurper, not to punish a population or conquer purely to feed his army. Further, Kerensky knew he had to crush the Rimworld's Republic to strand Amaris in the hegemony, to cut Amaris off from the resources of the Rimworld's Republic and prevent a difficult two-front war.
Yeah.
Amaris flipped out at the impending invasion and almost immediately called on his hidden army in the form of formerly loyal Periphery allies to assist. Most chose now to do what Kerensky had done to Amaris. Say no. Amaris had betrayed them, after all. A bare few moved to reinforce Amaris's holdings, but for the most part, the stage was set for what unfolded. Kerensky split his forces to conquer effectively, with commands each having objectives, timetables, and resources appropriate to their abilities and talents. Further, he split some of his forces to go conduct reconnaissance in the hegemony, just to poke at Amaris and make him wonder if it were all a diversion. Kerensky put half his army under the command of his trusted adjutant, General Aaron D. Chevalier. Their forces ran with 3 armies each and 4 in reserve. The plan was to rapidly punch through the hegemony and roll them up before any counterattack was possible, leaving the capital for last. Kerensky sent a message to Amaris' stooge running the Rimworld's Republic as Amaris was busy playing police state in the hegemony. Kerensky offered surrender and no ill treatment if the Rimworld's Republic would merely stand down. Amaris' stooge said no, and then Kerensky attacked. In theory, what Kerensky intended...
Again, as I said, there's a lot of people just saying no, like no explanation, just no.
...was considered to be near impossible, if not exceptionally difficult. And doubly so with an army that effectively had no reserve or logistical support other than what they carried, scrounged, or stole. If they took any significant losses, there was no real chance to replace anything.
Yeah.
Their numbers of mechs, tanks, rifles, bullets, and band-aids were finite. At first, Kerensky was cautious, both to spare his own men material losses and the civilian population the cruelty of war. But when the hidden army failed to respond to Amaris and the Rimworld's Republic failed to counterattack, it was on like Donkey Kong. And the outcome was pretty fucking incredible. Kerensky conquered all 248 worlds in 3 short years. To say this was a blitzkrieg is a massive understatement.
Oh, I'm sorry, I something didn't connect there in my brain. How many worlds in 3 years?
Kerensky conquered all 248 worlds in 3 short years.
248 worlds in 3 years. Okay, I want to do some math there for a second. So that's almost 83 worlds a year, or that's almost the fact that they'd conquer an entire planet, mind you, in like just under 4.5 days. Oh god, that is almost like the definition of blitzkrieg. Jesus. Okay, wait, I gotta do some more math there. So I mean, I'm going to assume, just for gravity's sake, that all the planets are at least a similar size to Earth. 509,600,000 kilometers squared, and then we'll have that divided by 4 points. We'll round up to 4.5, and that meant that they were conquering like 113,244,444 square kilometers every day. Jeez! You gotta love how absurd, like, wars in sci-fi can get sometimes. That is nuts! Now, granted, that being said, I am fully aware that, conquering a planet could very well just be, invade the planetary capital and get them to surrender instead of having to go hard fought over, like, every square foot of land. But at the same time, that's still impressive.
To say this was a blitzkrieg is a massive understatement.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost 7 worlds a month. 7 defended, garrison, militarized populations a month. One by one, the worlds fell like clockwork in a master plan. The SLDF was Kerensky's tempered vengeance visited upon Amaris' legacy, while again, carefully sparing damage to civilian infrastructure. What's worse, unwilling to budge his own forces to assist, Amaris could only sit and watch from occupied Terra as his home went dark one system at a time. The RimWorld Republic.
You know what? I'm this close to retracting my statement about saying that Amaris was brilliant, because that is very stupid.
Public forces had the benefit of preparation and an extensive home field advantage. Further, they were bolstered by paramilitaries and extensive security forces. However, they didn't have the numbers of the SLDF. Kerensky embraced his tactical advantage and just steamrolled them into the earth while they died defending pointlessly. As the war rolled on, many RimWorld's units threw down their arms, risking the wrath of political officers none too pleased. The reason for abandoning the cause was simple. They saw themselves as citizens of the RimWorld's Republic first and supporters of Amaris as a distant second. Amaris had failed them, and they weren't willing to die for a bib-wearing overlord. No, they were more inclined to follow
always
Kerensky.
Comes back to the bib.
And some did. Kerensky allowed them to serve, and some would, with distinction, try to right the wrongs of their former overlord. That's not to say there weren't some holdouts. Some die-hard RimWorld's Republic soldiers would just feign surrender to detonate suicide vests, echoing the sentiments of the Periphery just a few short years earlier.
Yeah.
As the RimWorld's Republic government fell, armed militants and militias rose to fight their former overlords, the SLDF, or each other. Mass stockpiles of weapons found their way to the hands of increasingly angry populations intent on shooting anyone not aligned with their ideology. There was something else to consider as well.
Yeah.
Authoritarians have a bad habit of leaving people in charge that they can trust rather than someone with a spine. Naturally, the administrator left in charge of the RimWorld's Republic, while loyal to Amaris and a capable bureaucrat, was, at most, a spineless yes-man. Kerensky conquered his way to the heart of the RimWorld's Republic in an impossibly short time span considering the above complications. I'm sparing you the details of a 3-year campaign at this juncture, so that I
this
may
video's
perhaps
already long
revisit it
enough.
in detail later for future broadcast.
Oh God.
At the end of this campaign, all that was left was Apollo, the capital of the RimWorld's Republic. Kerensky had approached Apollo carefully.
Wait, there's a BattleTech cartoon? BattleTech cartoon or from here? What? 1994. Okay, so it was from that era. Oh my God, there's an oh wow. Oh, I'm gonna have to watch this later. This looks so stupid. I'm gonna love it.
Public. Kerensky had approached Apollo carefully, saving it for last. He'd thoroughly isolated it before this point, blocking HPG traffic that the SLDF decided the RimWorld's Republic didn't need to hear. Fleets patrolled the system to ensure no use of pirate points for messages or reinforcements, and jump points were now long secured by the SLDF. Kerensky wanted the leaders of the RimWorld's Republic to sit in communications blackout, wondering what the hell was going on, stewing in their own fear. In fact, Apollo had been cut off through careful maneuvering by Kerensky for well over a year by the time he struck.
Jeez, really?
Kerensky took to the field, making Planetfall himself to find loyalist Amaris forces engaged in a brutal suppression campaign against their own people.
Oh, of
Further,
course,
newly constructed fortresses provided some resistance, though they were dangerously undermanned. Internal security had obviously been an issue for some time. Before long, the SLDF had things in hand, with defectors and surrendering RimWorld's forces deeply straining the SLDF's capacity to hold prisoners of war. by the time the SLDF dropped in on the grand capital of the RimWorld's Republic, the SLDF were seen as heroes and liberators by a war-weary population. The average RimWorld citizen had long been under the thumb of a ruthless tyrant from a family of tyrants, and for the first time in their lives had a chance to live the promise of a freer life. When the SLDF rolled into Amaris' capital, they found the streets full of jubilant celebration upon their arrival, and Amaris' chancellor hanging from a lamppost. The government of the RimWorld's Republic was utterly crippled. Its soldiers dead, surrendered or defecting. Its bureaucracy in pieces and its government stockpiles either seized by the SLDF or looted by growing warlords.
You know, I gotta wonder. Granted, I mean, they said warlords, so that might mean, so that also means that, you know, their discontent and other things are growing. Same time, I mean, he's probably going to say it, but like, I have to wonder, like, at this point, are they going to start turning over like the war production that the RimWorld's Republic had to start feeding their fleet as well? Oh, that'll be so good. Oh, again, I know that this is going to end in tragedy for both sides still, but I mean, I'm loving this as it's happening. And that is it for now. If you want to see the second part of this reaction, links to it are in the description in the top corner of the video, as well as it should be, you know, appearing over my face any second now. I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.